This message was recorded at the Billy Graham Training Center at the Cove in Asheville, North Carolina. Through the ministry of the Cove, we're training people in God's Word to win others to Christ. It's our goal to develop Christians who experience God through knowing Him better, knowing His Word, building godly relationships, and helping others know Him. We trust that this message will strengthen your walk with God and help you experience Him right where you are.
Well, good evening.
Good evening.
7:30. I have to confess, several of you come up, a lot of you came up and talked. And I've been pushing you a little bit this week. I didn't know what level I should do this at. And most of you are telling me you're hanging with me, stopping here and there and thinking about things, but hanging with me. And I'm very gratified. I'd rather give you heavier stuff and let you move up than give you stuff you know and just remind you of what you know. So I've got a little pile of questions here, and we'll see if anybody else has questions. Get this first one. As a former ice hockey coach, who is your favorite NHL team? Okay? The Chicago Blackhawks. Because if you know anything about hockey, when I was a little kid, I saw this blonde guy. They didn't wear helmets in those days. And I saw this blonde guy skating, and turned out to be Bobby Hull, who was the fastest skater at the time. His nickname was the Golden Jet, but he had the hardest shot in hockey history. And it was on the gun twice at 113 and 120 miles an hour. So I thought, that guy's got to be it. So I was raised in Detroit, and everybody thinks I'm a Red Wings fan. I like the Red Wings fine, but I'm a Blackhawk fan. Oh, by the way, I've got pictures in my office. Well, I had them when I had an office up at the school. I work in my house now. My favorite hockey player, when Lee Strobel interviewed me for Case of Christ, you may remember a little discussion at the beginning. He said, who's your favorite hockey player? And I said, well, you have to specify. Do you mean my favorite player or my favorite fighter? I was dead serious. And on the wall, 10 feet to the right of him while he interviewed me, was a signed photo from Bobby Hull, for Gary, Bobby Hull. And right next to it was the fighter for the Philadelphia Flyers, and Dave the Hammer Schultz, very well-known fighter, and he's right next to it. But what I like about the Dave Schultz, he doesn't call himself the Hammer after he got out of hockey, because he said he was pushed to be a fighter and he'd rather have just played, but he had to fight. And he wrote a book, I'm Not the Hammer, or something like that. But he signed my photo for Gary, Dave the Hammer Schultz. So that's my answer to that one. All right, now we've got some really good ones here. What was the purpose of the Christians being brought out of the graves after Jesus' resurrection, and where did they go? Matthew 27:53. Here's the verse. And came out of the graves after his resurrection and went into the holy city and appeared to many. Okay. It's an odd passage of scripture. It's not explained, but here's where you put them in your list. We've talked yesterday and today about Elisha and Elijah raising people, Elijah being taken up in a chariot. That's not resurrection. That's called apotheosis, taken to heaven without dying. And in the New Testament, Jesus raised 3 people. Peter raises Dorcas in Acts. The thing with there's no competition for Jesus, of course. I mean, they wouldn't be. They believed the same things. But there's no competition because every one of those people had to die, not counting Enoch, but he wasn't raised. He didn't die. So everybody else had to die again. New Testament scholars who think this is true, critics hate this passage. They think Matthew just made something up. So you can't talk to the critics about it. But those who take scripture seriously throughout say that they're like a bunch of Lazaruses. They were raised, and they go, well, how come nobody knows about them walking in the city? Because if you were raised and you're going to die anyway, when Lazarus came from the tomb, nobody said, wow, he's got a halo around him. Look, he's a holy guy. He must be a whatever. Lazarus just went around life like normal. These guys just went around. You wouldn't notice anything if you saw them walking around the city. If you went to the, to pick up food in the center of the city, it was Passover time. The city's swollen with people, and they would fit right in. But so there were a bunch of Lazaruses, basically, people who were raised from the dead, in that temporal sense of having to die again. Where do you find useful implementation of the different apologetic methods apart from evidentialism? Okay, I'm part of a book called 5 Views on Apologetic Methods with Zondervan. And I take the evidential view. You don't need to know this stuff on methods. But they asked me, what do you think about the other methods in the book? And they ask, Alvin Plantinga's Reformed Epistemology or Van Til's Presuppositionalism. Well, those are guys we debated in the book. I like some better than others. Plantinga, who's retired now, he's about 80 years old. He is probably the most brilliant philosopher in the world. And he taught at Notre Dame for many years. Now, he had a PhD from Yale, and he was given teaching offers to go to Yale and Harvard, I understand, and Cambridge and Oxford. And he didn't. And he went to Notre Dame, but he wasn't Catholic. He went to Notre Dame because they gave him a huge budget, and he opened a Christian study center. And for years, he brought major philosophers in. He's just a major mind. Most people don't want to dialogue with him. He's just like over everybody's head. And I'm fine with some Plantinga stuff. Now, here's where I am basically in my evidential, if you're interested in method like this question. Van Til is probably the one I have least in common with. How many of you know who Cornelius Van Til is? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I actually debated him late in his life. We had a little debate together. It wasn't a mean debate. It was a fun debate. He was fairly elderly, and that was a good time. And what I appreciate, I don't think much of the method. It's Reformed. I'm not Reformed, but it's, well, I won't go into detail. But after the debate was over, he came up to me, and he was just a real gentleman. And he said to me, he goes, "You beat me this time. I'll get you next time." And then I gave him a couple of his books, and I asked him to sign them. And this is what I will always remember. He gave one of the books back to me. He had a PhD in philosophy from Princeton, right? No little thing. He gave me the book back, and Cornelius Van Til, PhD. PhD was crossed out. He's got it, but PhD is crossed out, and he signed his name underneath. And I said, "Why did you cross this out?" I'll never forget 4 words. It's of the world. And after his wife died, he was still alive, and Christianity Today interviewed him. They asked him, "How do you want to be remembered?" Now, he's a great philosopher. He said, "I want to be remembered as a Christian evangelist." Amazing. So I can respect these guys. I have no problem with the different methodologies. I think we can take different methodologies at different times. I'm an evidentialist, but I have a lot in common with the other views, so no problems with them. Let's see, I think that's that one. Oh, sorry. What is the book that we could order? Kuhlman's what? Kuhlman's book is called The Earliest Christian Confessions. If you get an old copy, you're going to pay a whole lot of money. But if you get the new one for Whiff and Stock, WIPF and STOCK, very well-known publisher, it's only going to cost you new $10 or $12 as opposed to $100. But it's, pardon?
Where'd you say get it from?
Whiff and Stock. You know what? All you gotta do is put it in Google. Whiff and Stock will come up. So go to Google Books, and Oscar Kuhlman, Cullmann, he was German. All these guys were, just about. And the book's called Earliest Christian Confessions. Many people say it is the best book. There's other stronger ones, but it's the most famous book on Christian creeds. Another good one. Given the significance of the communion in the Gospels, John and Paul. Now, right away, what are we doing? We go back to Monday night. That's the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Is Mark there? Yep, one source. John, 2. Paul, 3. A 3 count is really strong. And so, given the significance of communion of the Gospels, John and Paul, what do you think is the early church teaching as to whether the bread and wine are true body and blood, it says Catholic, or simply in remembrance, Protestant? Okay. In a lot of doctrine, I was the chair of the Department of Philosophy and Theology at Liberty for years, and I would tell them, a lot of people expect you to put a name on your door, like, all theological questions inquire inside, the buck stops here, because I'm the department head, and there's like 15 guys in my department, they're really sharp guys. And I tell people, I don't do theology that way. I do theology when you get the fundamentals straight, and we have to be clear on the fundamentals, which I think, it depends on if you double them up, or like Jerry Falwell used to say, Jerry Sr. said that the virgin birth, he would say, Christ's deity is shown by the virgin birth. A lot of people count those as two, deity and virgin birth. Depending on what you double up, there's about 12 fundamental doctrines. And I often do what I call a circle chart. It's circles, like a bullseye. And the first two circles are the fundamentals. But the difference between 1 and 2 is 1 are the gospel fundamentals. I list them first, not because they're most important. Now, this might hit you strange after everything I've been saying, but the gospel is not the most important facts in the universe. The most important fact, I would say, is this simple: God is, or if you prefer, just God. That's the most important fact in the universe. But as far as us crossing the threshold into heaven, that center circle, which I just erased off the board, facts plus faith equals salvation, that inner circle for me would include deity, death, resurrection, and faith. Facts plus faith equals salvation. Then the second circle would be other fundamentals: creation, second coming, heaven, hell, inspiration of Scripture, the Trinity, etc. So they would be still fundamentals. Now, after that comes the most heated ones. The most heated ones are usually not the fundamentals. The most heated ones are, try somebody hasn't asked me, watch, it'll be up here tomorrow. Are you an Arminian or a Calvinist? Neither. I call my theology Baptistic. They go, well, that just sounds like a cop-out. What is it? There's no such brand as Baptist. I go, no, there really is. Arminian have their beliefs, Calvinists have theirs, but Baptists hold a middle ground position. A lot of times Baptists want to think of themselves as Calvinists, but I'll tell you what, the Calvinists do not want Baptists to call them Calvinists, because usually Baptists are dispensational in their eschatology, and Calvinists are covenantal. They don't believe in the tribulation followed by, they think Revelation is symbolic and so on. But the middle position is the Baptist position. So, and I'm Baptistic, I take that middle ground. But when you get beyond the two circles, I'll say, people, I don't have to give you the last word on this. I can give you parameters and tell you where the views are and let you study it and come down on your own. Because I'm on the non-fundamentals, I'm not going to tell you, you need to go this way. It's a non-fundamental for a reason. You can come down where you want. And I think the communion, I would make communion a fundamental. I take a very strong Baptistic view on baptism by immersion and communion as being very, very important. But a lot of other people don't count, almost nobody counts communion as a fundamental. So I would move it in on my list into the second circle, but I let people are free to do what they want. Okay, now my view here, I don't take the Catholic view of transubstantiation, which is true blood and true water. I've got a Greek Orthodox friend. He's a very godly guy. He was very high. I say Greek Orthodox. He's Russian Orthodox. He was very high in the Russian church. He was one of the highest people, Russian Orthodox. And he says, we have a lot in common with Protestants because our hermeneutics and your hermeneutics are very much the same. We interpret Scripture the way you do. And I hope he says, I hope we never band with the Catholics because we have like nothing in common with them, or not much. He said, we think highly of evangelicals. And then I asked him one day, what do you think about salvation? Get this, almost every Baptist would say something like this if they knew the option was there to say it. He said, I don't care whether you're Orthodox, Catholic, or Protestant, because the name over your door is not the important thing. The whole question is, what have you done with Christ? Is that cool or what? I mean, you expect a Baptist to say that. What you've done with Christ is what gets you into the door of the kingdom. It's inner circle. And so on this question, I'm not Catholic. This guy says if you don't believe that it's the real body and blood, he said, I don't know, you're close to losing your salvation on that one. I mean, he really takes that seriously, but that's not my position. I try to be humble about it. I don't really like the in remembrance view, which is Calvin. This do in remembrance of me. Yes, we do it in remembrance of me. Jesus said that. But I like actually that was Zwingli who said that. Calvin, I'm not a Calvinist in virtually anything. Anybody who knows me says, don't ask if he's a Calvinist, he can't stand it. And we play around with it in class. But I like Calvin's view on the communion. He believes in the spiritual presence of Christ in the elements. It's not just do this because you're remembering me. There it is. Take the juice and the bread. You're doing it to remember me. I think Jesus is present. Now, I don't mean not the literal body and blood. My view is that Jesus is spiritually present, like he is in our services, like he is in preaching. Jesus is spiritually present, especially in communion, because it was so close to him. So, whatever it's worth, that's my view. Okay, any other questions?
You asked me to ask a question that I gave to you after the
Oh, yeah. Go ahead. Yeah, this is good. It'll get there.
I said to you this afternoon that if I had an apologetic baseball team, you'd be my cleanup hitter, and because of the level of scholarship and just all of this, you said that the critics accept so much of what you have to say, but then I asked you what their opinion was of you and your data, and whether it was convincing to them or why it wasn't convincing to them. So, because how they regard you will be how they'll regard all of us who use the same methods.
So why don't they go further than just admitting the facts? Which, by the way, tomorrow morning we've already started the evidence with the creeds today. But tomorrow we're really getting into the facts. That starts tomorrow morning. We start going through the facts of the resurrection, including 20 arguments from the empty tomb. Okay, why don't they believe? First of all, thanks for your sports comparison. I've played sports all my life. I played a little cleanup. If I say one thing, I've hit a lot of balls over the fence. So I like that illustration. I don't think of myself that way, but it happened. Okay, why don't they come? Why don't they come to us? A lot of people think that if they agree with us on the facts, they should just normally walk in the kingdom doors and trust Christ. But there's something in between that we forget. They're called worldviews. And our worldviews, think about in politics, what are you? Oh, I'm a this. Yeah, but did you hear the other guy made a really good argument for that? Yeah, it was kind of a good argument, but I hate his position. See, we always judge by positions in politics. We judge by positions in religion. Politics and religion have a lot in common because people feel very strongly about them, and people have kind of, you might say, worldviews, political worldview, religious worldview. They don't want to do what we're doing. They don't want to say yes to the Lord. They wouldn't want me to say this, but I've said it in print. Because they don't like what it entails to follow Christ. So they may not be able to refute the facts. It's like this. You can date somebody. Hopefully you don't if you're married, but you can date somebody back in those days. But there are a lot of people you date that you don't want to marry. And dating is not the same as getting married, even if you really like the person, and you can check off a list of things we have in common. But you don't say, I do. That's very commonly known. And they will check off the list, and they won't say, I do. As in, commit your life to Christ. Not there. And what I told you, and I asked him he asked me to tell the story. For a guy who does not like debates, I get tired of them. I've had a lot, probably close to 50. And one of the guys I dialogued with was an agnostic New Testament scholar. We were on the Justin Briley program. What's the name of his program? Unbelievable. We were both in the studios in London. He's British. And I debated him in a book with Oxford on the resurrection. And he just freely admits my data. We'll talk about it first thing in the morning, Lord willing. He freely admits my facts. And so Justin Briley, who runs the show, and he's the moderator, he asked this fellow, he said, Gary, would you give us your facts? I gave him the facts. He said, James, what do you think? James Crossley. What do you think? He said, those facts are good. I'm good with them. And then Justin said, well, okay. And James said, can I add something? And Justin said, sure. He said, Gary's facts just aren't true. They're the most solid facts in the New Testament. All right. Then what are you going to do with them? And it went on like that for a long time. Why don't you pick a theory? Pick a naturalistic theory. When you debate with somebody in the resurrection, you want them to pick a theory. Oh, they were copycatting off Isis and Osiris. This is the question we got this morning. Well, almost nobody says that, but they could go there. The disciples saw hallucinations. That's still the most common, but not that many people take it, but that's because most people don't take naturalistic theories anymore. You can take other views. Nobody says the disciples stole the body. Nobody says somebody other than the disciples stole the body. A few take that one. None say the disciples stole the body. Virtually nobody says Jesus didn't die on the cross, so he faked his death, so it wasn't a resurrection. I can think of one contemporary scholar who takes that view. And Tom Wright, who's probably the chief New Testament scholar today, great guy, evangelical, great scholar, former Oxford professor. He was talking about this person who takes the Jesus never died view, and he was criticizing her writings. And he said, she's crazy. He said, she says crazy things, and the only one that believes what she says is her. That was in print. In print, he said that about her, and I thought, whoa, that's kind of stiff. But nobody takes that view on the swoon theory. And so we were encouraging him, pushing him to take a theory, because if you really know the responses to the theory, you're going to get somebody in the corner real fast. And they know that. I debated an atheist one time, and he had a pipe in his mouth, which was really funny, because all over the doors were signs, no smoking, no smoking, no smoking. He lights up and starts smoking. And I was given facts, and he said, I can't really refute them. And I said, well, pick a theory. I don't want to pick a theory. Pick a theory. I don't want to. Why not? Because you'll get me in a corner, it'll be a tight squeeze, and then I'll have to get angry. Now, see, that's that angry atheist kind of thing. And so I said, well, just pick one. He goes, okay, the disciples stole the body. The worst theory you can pick. It hasn't been held by a critic, basically, for 250 years. If those guys don't take this theory, there's a reason they haven't taken it. It's horrible. But he took it. And I started I started working him in the corner, and he said, he was biting, people talk when they have a pipe in their mouth. We forgot how that sounds, but you bite down to the pipe and you're talking. And he said, Habermas, you're getting me angry. I told you this would happen. And as far as I'm concerned, this debate is over. And he wouldn't talk anymore. So you try to push him into a corner. Well, Briley's pushing James Crossley, and he's not picking a theory. And so finally, at the end of the program, we did 2 programs. At the end of the second program, dialogue, he said, James, let me ask you a question. If you buy all this, why don't you believe? Pretty bold for one of the top New Testament scholars in the world. And James said, yeah, I'm not really into belief. My field is more like New Testament sociology. And I'm really interested in the sociology of Jesus' time. Like 70 to 90% of the people were illiterate. I mean, that's sociology. And he said, I'm really into that. Well, how about belief? I don't care about belief and unbelief. Now, that was the closest he had to a reason. He doesn't feel like believing. It's like saying, yes, I dated her. And I'm saying that way because he's a guy. Yes, I dated her, but we didn't get married. Okay, why not? Well, you don't marry everybody you date. You got to make choices. That's basically what he's saying. And he didn't want to marry Jesus. He didn't want to say, I do. That was it. And I quit talking after a while because he conceded the whole case. So Justin was going back and forth with him, and he just ended by saying, I don't want to make a decision. I'm not going to marry him. So that was the end of it. And he asked me to repeat that. And that happens today. Very few critical scholars choose naturalistic theories. By the way, this is not a naturalistic theory. That's a bunch of baloney. I don't believe that stuff. That's a denial. That's not a naturalistic theory. So when someone says to me, that's a bunch of baloney, I don't understand why you believe it. What do you say? Say it back to me. And I go, well, I'm a Christian, so I believe it. What's it to you? And then they often spill the beans and they go, you can't say that. You don't have any evidence for that. Well, I got plenty of evidence for the resurrection, but I'm responding in kind. He goes, I don't believe that junk. I say, well, I do believe it. You're not giving me reasons. And I suppose you did. He didn't give any reasons. He just said, I don't believe it. That's a denial, and Christians only have to say, well, I believe it. But if they take a theory, then you got to be ready to give reasons. And I don't know, I'm probably not going to get into naturalistic theories this week. Very few people choose them. The guys that live in their folks' basement who believe Jesus never lived, those guys, they'll come up with theories all the time. But the critics don't like them. They don't think they know what they're talking about. So you'll find theories online, but it's almost always those guys, not the scholars. Very few scholars pick theories. And that's important to say because I don't think I'm going to be able to get through the naturalistic theories with you. If someone has a specific question like, what do we say about hallucination? I'll be glad to talk about a specific thing. We already did the dying and rising gods, right? Horus and Isis and Osiris and Hercules and so on. Anyone else?
You kind of answered that question, about many appeared, after the earthquake and went to the holy city.
Oh, Matthew 27?
Yes, sir. But I was wondering where you kind of related that they were like Lazarus. So after they came up out of the graves, did they continue just to live forever?
No.
Or what happened?
By far the most common view, about the only view, is that they just went to the market every day and lived and had normal lives, and maybe their relatives were still living. Maybe it was a funeral in the last 2 years, and they just went about life like Lazarus did.
Okay.
So just normal life, and they had to die again. So they died twice, but They got extra time.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. They're not resurrected, though, in the New Testament sense. You go, what is the New Testament sense? By far, the majority Jewish view and the majority Christian view is that the dead are raised in real bodies. Now, when you define real bodies, there's slight nuances of meaning, but the fact is it's a bodily resurrection, not a ephemeral, spiritual. That's Plato. Plato taught that when you die, you flee, your spirit flees to the heavens, bodily. It's a beautiful afterlife, and you spend your whole life learning. You go, oh, great. I'd rather be playing cleanup on the church softball team. But that was Plato's view. But he did not hold a bodily view. That's the Greek view. And it's, there's been some works lately that say the Greeks held a view like the Jews. But that's got to be argued out. Jews and Christians believed in bodily resurrection appearances very strongly. And the guys who've done the most work on this are Tom Wright. He's got 500 pages of a 750-page book. 500 pages argue for the nature of resurrection, that the body was raised. Mike Lacona, my student, who's got another 700. They're the two best books on resurrection. Mike's is probably the best historically. It's called The Resurrection of Jesus, New Historiographical Approach. It's published by InterVarsity Academic. Great book. It'll cost you a little bit. Actually, they brought the price down on those big books. It's $750, and it might be like $38 or $50, but for 750 pages. Mike does a good job with bodily. There's other books. If you're interested in sources on bodily, I can tell you, but Tom Wright's book is The Resurrection of the Son of God. So he brings deity in. If you talk about resurrection, he brings deity just like we're doing tonight. We're talking about resurrection, we're bringing deity in because it's part of the gospel. Okay, anyone else? That's my center circle. Got another one over there?
You said that the secular scholars would allow you to use Romans, 1st
Yep.
and 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, Philippians, Thessalonians, and Philemon. What are the reasons that they won't let you use the other ones?
They think that the other epistles, especially the pastoral epistles, especially Second Thessalonians, so if they're going to go another one, they'll usually go Second Thessalonians. They're not crazy about 1st, 2nd Timothy, and Titus because they think the Greek is different than Paul's Greek. These guys really, really, really know Greek. But I think they've made a kind of a category problem. They'll say the Greek changes. Well, here's my thought. Whose English doesn't change by the end of their life? You learn new vocabulary, new words, and so on. And one more thing. A number of Paul's books, like a lot of critics will say, there's a world of difference between 1st and 2nd Peter. 1st Peter is sharp Greek. 2nd Peter is like what a fisherman would write. The same guy couldn't have written them. Well, they're overlooking something. 1st Peter, he says, by Silvanus's hand, I've written this. Silvanus is Silas. That's his Greek name. He's Greek. 1st Peter has polished Greek. So you could call Silas a co-author with Peter of 1st Peter. That would explain why with Silas, his Greek is far better than when left to himself and he's doing street Greek, because it's the language of the empire, but he's doing fisherman Greek. And that would explain it. So I don't like that argument that says this just doesn't seem like Paul's writings. One prominent New Testament critic, his name is Luke Timothy Johnson. He teaches in Atlanta. And when he teaches his intro classes, he's a critic. He uses all 13 of Paul's epistles, but he's like the only one that does that. So they do it because they think the hand is different than Paul's. And I'm saying, number one, we all change in our writing. And number two, Paul often uses co-authors. He tells you that. Look what he does in Romans. And then I have a problem with Romans, and he's got other ones who are helping him. Although Paul's Greek was very good, you can tell. He's a scholar. So, all right. Anyone else? I'm not trying to rush you, but anybody else? Okay. If you have a specific question on the naturalistic theories, disciples stole the body, some other disciple, the big five. By the way, they're in the Gospels. I'll tell you that real quick. I'll take a moment. You say, well, maybe when you said that, those five are in the Gospels, and I said 3 of the 5 were thought about by Christians. I can do this real fast. Disciples stole the body. Is that in there? Well, think about where you get that. And then you have the second one, somebody other than the disciples stole the body. Okay, the disciples stole the body. The Jewish priests believed that might happen, and that's why they put guards in front of the tomb. They might come in and do it, okay? Somebody other than the disciples may have moved the body. Mary Magdalene at the tomb thinks Jesus is the gardener, and she says to him, if you've taken the body, tell me so we can get it and put it back in the tomb. So she thinks the gardener moved the body, someone other than the disciples, okay? Is the swoon theory that Jesus did die on the cross, is that anywhere in the Gospels? Well, when Jesus died on the cross, Joseph goes to Pilate and asks for the body. And I like the King James wording here. Pilate says, Pilate marveled that he was so soon dead. So he calls the centurion in for the field and says, is he dead? Now, Pilate didn't say he was faking or anything, but it occurred to him that Jesus may not have died yet. So he calls the centurion in, and the centurion said, he's done for. It's over. He tells Joseph, you could have the body. So the swoon theory occurs to Pilate. Hallucination, remember in Luke chapter 24, the disciples, I love the King James here again, they were terrified and affrighted and supposed they'd seen a spirit. Now that could have been a real spirit. Sometimes there might be a spirit, but it's open that they could have been hallucination too. And Jesus says, handle me and see, for a spirit hath not flesh and bones as you see me have. There's a bodily view. But whatever they thought, some kind of spirit, real or imagined or whatever, hallucination maybe, Jesus goes, not me. And then he said, give me some fish. So spirits don't eat, and here's my body, touch me. That's Jesus' answer to hallucination or something like it. And the legend view that we talked about, the earlier one about Isis and Osiris and all that, when the women in Luke go back to the disciples and they tell him that the grave was empty, you should look at, I mean, these folks had real questions. In Luke chapter 24, verse 10, here's what it said. The disciples thought they were spreading idle tales. Little, come on, gals, this is phone tag. Where'd you get this from? Because at that time, there were all kinds of old stories about people who never lived and Hercules and all that. They were around. And the disciples blamed them with just gossiping or spreading tales. And then, you know the story, Peter and John and whoever else might have. Luke says Peter and the guys, and he mentions Peter. John says Peter and John. They run to the tomb and they walked away, and only John believed, if you read that. They were still wondering, and later, a few hours later, they see Jesus. And the tales thing is blown away by the data. So all 5 of them are there. And 3 of them are thought up by the Christians. The 2 non-Christians were the Jewish, the priests, and Pilate. The 3 Christians they thought they'd seen a spirit. The women are spreading idle tales, and Mary thinking the gardener moved the body. So they're all there. We're normal human beings, and everybody asks questions. I told you first day here, Monday, John the Baptist sent his disciples to Jesus and said, are you the Messiah, or should we seek somebody else? It's like, oh man, maybe you could have asked Jesus, are you the Messiah? But don't ask the second one, should we look for somebody else? John? And one more thing. When did Jesus call John the most righteous man ever born of a woman? When did he say that? He said it when the 2 guys who asked the question were walking away. They hadn't even gotten back to John yet. They'd left, and Jesus pronounced him the most righteous man, which is really, really cool, because that means doubting is not necessarily a sin. We've all had questions, and John raising that question did not keep him from the kingdom. And Jesus still thought he was the greatest man ever born. But he was doubting at that very moment. Isn't that neat? Jesus knows weaknesses. Read the book of Psalms. And that's another great, I've tried to stick them in whenever I can this week, but we've got another one for you tomorrow like this, but it's a pastoral point. If you've asked questions of God like that, and you've had some time where he had some tough questions, that doesn't mean God's disowned you. The question is, like my Russian Orthodox friend says, the question is, where is Jesus with you? Where are you with him? Baptists would say the same thing. Where's your relationship with Christ? Okay. All right. Let's move here to, this one's got a few more slides than normal, but we can cruise through them because I'll tell you what I'm doing. We had to do the creeds first because I'm mostly going to use the creeds. And I'm going to tell you why. Here's a famous phrase today that's being used by theologians. It's a powerful, powerful phrase. I'll tell you a little story that speaks for most critics. Unfortunately, one of them just died, but 2 of the top New Testament scholars in the world are 2 guys named James D.G. Dunn. They're both Brits. James D.G. Dunn and Richard Bauckham, of amazing careers writing. And I had lunches with both of them over the years. We had private lunches. And they both took a very popular view at that time on the deity of Christ. And it went like this. Mark is doing deity, but he doesn't get into it as deeply as John, but Mark starts it. But Mark was an apostle. John's believed to be an apostle. John gets 30 more years to reflect, So the Christology keeps getting deeper as we go on. And the belief was that by the time you get to John, the reason John's theology is so deep, John calls Jesus God more than anybody else. But you know what, too? He also says that Jesus was the servant. So in the Godhead, Jesus has the same nature as God. Remember, Hebrews 1, Philippians 2, Colossians 2. Jesus has the same nature as God, but in position, Jesus always said, I'm the obedient son. I can do nothing but what I see my Father do. He was always obedient. So in position, it's like saying, silly example, on the Army bowling team. The general bosses everybody around during the day. But at night, the corporal is the captain. And he tells the general, well, I've told you 100 times, when you go to throw that ball, move over 2 boards before you let that thing go. And the corporal is chewing out the general. It's about whose positions are and who's doing what, you know. And in the Godhead, there are positions. The positions have nothing to do with the essence. Just like the corporal and the general are fully humans. And you know why this doctrine is so important? This is the basis for the Christian view against abortion. Because they believe fetuses are persons. And so personhood is the most important thing. Human beings are holy to the Lord, but there are positions. There's a pastor in a church, and there are elders, and there are deacons, and there are Sunday school teachers, and there are lay people. We have positions too. But don't say anybody should be aborted or anybody should be killed, or it's no big deal because we value life. So same thing in the Godhead. So by the time you get to John, he's got a developed Christology. And Bauckham and Dunn both said to me, I take that view. I take the view that it took a long time for the church to unpack Jesus' Christology because it was deep, deep, deep. And it took till John. It took 65 years for them to realize it. A prominent American New Testament scholar, Raymond Brown, said before he died, he said, if Jesus had returned in 100 AD and had read John's gospel, he would say, that's where I was going. John did a good job. That's where I was going. So that was the most prominent view, that John has the highest Christology. They've all changed now. Like I said, Dunn has died, but Dunn and Bauckham and most New Testament scholars, for different reasons, but they believe that here's the sentence. It's just outstanding sentence. The earliest Christology is the highest Christology. All right, let me say it a different way. The Christology of the creeds is the highest Christology of all, and it was taught from the very beginning. Let me say it this way. Coming out of the gate in 30 AD, Jesus is dead, he appears for 40 days, he ascends, and the disciples are preaching. Pentecost, the first great sermon. Coming out of the gate is a very high Christology. You'll see in just a minute. That's what this lecture is all about. What changed the disciples from saying, I'll take my sword and kill anybody who tries to kill you, I'll go to my death with you? They had different views of what Jesus was trying to say. And it's questionable how thoroughly they believed he was the essence of God. Probably they didn't have that while they were walking with him. That's, they're doing other things. But by the time they came out and started preaching, they had this very deep Christology. Where did they get it? Now, obviously, Jesus was preaching it, but it didn't make, as we'll see too, but it wasn't making an impression on them. So what propelled, what was the cannon that shot Christianity out from the gate to go from, they talk about cars that can go from 0 to 60 in 3 seconds. What caused the gospel to go from 0 to 60 on the first month of preaching? Because it did. What? The Holy Spirit comes, and that's good. Most significantly, he was raised from the dead. Now, before he was raised from the dead, he's merely making claims. We hear you, but man, we don't know what to do with you. And that's why John said, are you the Messiah? Are we looking for another? But when he was raised from the dead, here's what it said to everybody. Whoa, he really is who he said. Now, here's how the thinking goes. Acts 2:22 to 24, you find this little argument. Here it is. If Jesus were a false prophet, let's take 2 examples. Deuteronomy 13. If somebody comes and does miracles, and they're really doing them, but they tell you to follow somebody else rather than Jehovah, stone them. Even if they do miracles isn't a pass to be teaching truth. they're a false prophet. Okay, Deuteronomy 18, if they predict the future and it doesn't come to true, stone them. They're trying to lead you away. So miracles and prophecy don't prove the person is a prophet. They could be just messed up, or worse, they could be false prophets and trying to lead you astray. So here's the disciples. They think long and hard about this. I think Paul thought really long and hard. Paul went away for 3 years to think about this after he was saved. What was he doing for 3 years? He's already got the credentials, PhD in Old Testament. He's doing some very deep thinking, and then he shows up at Jerusalem to talk to Peter and James. That's where we were today. Okay, it took them a while to think through this. But Jesus is making these incredible claims, as we will see tonight, Lord willing. And what's going on? When he's raised, it goes like this. He was raised. I saw him. Peter, you saw him. John. Thomas, man, you should have been such a stinking doubter. But hey, you spoke for me because I was glad you reached out and touched him. And I'm sure that's the way they talk to each other, and it's normal kind of stuff. And Jesus is there. They see him. They can't deny the resurrection. And yet they know that nobody else has been raised from the dead. Now, here's the way it goes. That's a huge miracle. But Deuteronomy 13 says he could be a false prophet. Yeah, but here's the problem. If he's a mere man, dead men don't do much. That's a little rule we believe. Dead men don't do much. If he was raised from the dead, his father had to act on him. Oh my gosh, can you figure this out? God raised him. What's he saying? He's a bum? No, he's saying he's my son. Oh man, have you guys thought that through? And they're hashing this all out. Well, did he predict the future? He was wrong? No, he said, I'm going up to Jerusalem. I'm going to die. I'm going to be raised. And they all said, that's a bunch of baloney. Don't die. Remember Peter said? And Jesus said, get thee behind me, Satan. They had wrong views. But it was blown away by the resurrection. And when Jesus was raised from the dead, that brought everything together. And resurrection plus some heavy meditation on this, and they realized that he was God's spokesperson. Because if he was either a miracle producer who's a false prophet, Deuteronomy 13, or a prophet who's a bad prophet, Deuteronomy 18, why is God raising him from the dead?
Proof.
He rose from the dead. It's true. So once they realized all that high Christology was true, do you remember what John says the disciples are doing? The women are the ones who go to the tomb. They were the ones willing to stick their neck out. And the men, according to John, they were hiding behind closed doors for fear of the Jews or the Romans. They were afraid. But then just a few days later, Peter's preaching that sermon, and then he and John do it later on healing the lame man. 5,000 people come to Christ. What happened to these guys? Simple answer. Well, the Holy Spirit came. That's important. And Jesus said he would, show you things. But they were witnesses of the resurrection of Christ, and that shot them out of the gate, and the world has never been the same. So what we need to do is investigate the creeds to see about this phrase, the earliest Christology is the highest Christology. So when I'm having lunch to get back to that, with Dunn and Bauckham, they both said, we've changed our view from it took until John to it was already worked out in 31-ish AD. It's already the highest Christology. You say, well, I don't remember it being real high Christology real early. Okay, then watch the creeds with me. Okay, that's what this is about. So let's take a look. Let's see where we are. Okay. We're going to take a look at the creeds, otherwise called traditions and so on. They predate the New Testament books just today. Here's Romans 1, 3, and 4. Jesus showed himself to be, and notice the ascendancy, he showed himself to be the Son of God, Christ, and Lord by his resurrection from the dead. Isn't that cool? Hey, one little side thing here, footnote. I like footnotes. Footnote. Paul never speaks of the resurrection of the dead without doing it in the plural. It's in the plural in Romans 1, the resurrection of the dead, because the early Christian view is all believers will be raised together corporately. So because Jesus said, because I live, you shall live also. But we'll be raised, unless we're lucky enough to go up with the Lord. We're all raised corporately, and Paul always uses the plural. That's cool. The resurrection of the dead ones is how he talks. But in Romans 1, 3, and 4, shown to be, and if you want to go to the least to the greatest, Christology, shown himself to be Christ or Messiah, Son of God and Lord, by his resurrection from the dead. That's pretty high. That's a creed. That's in Romans, which is in the 50s, but it goes back to the 30s. Okay, here's another one. Romans 10:9. We did this today. And I said, wait till tonight for the real proof of this. If you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God's raised him from the dead, you'll be saved. And this is believed to be what people said in the water. It was like their testimony in baptism. But Paul is answering, what is Lord mean? Because Lord can mean sir. Like when Paul says on the way to Damascus, who are you, Lord? He may only be saying, who are you, sir? Because that can mean that. How do we know Paul doesn't mean sir instead of Lord in Romans 10:9? Because just a few verses later, he quotes Joel, who says, whoever calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. What are these people doing in Romans 10:9? Whether it's in baptism or not, they're calling on the name of the Lord. And he quotes Joel, whoever calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. Guess what? In the Joel passage, what's the word for Lord there in the Old Testament? Jehovah. Whoa. Another mind buster. If you confess with your mouth that Jesus is, now he's not, remember, the Father and the Son are not the same person. There's three persons, one nature. So they're not saying he is the Father, but they're saying he's of the same essence. He quotes Joel, whoever called the name of the Lord will be saved. And he just got done saying, Lord, that is what Paul means by, it's a creed. But the part about Joel is Paul's comment on the creed. And he says, this is the Lord of the Old Testament. Now, two of the names I put up there earlier for what the scholars say about the creeds, one of them is Larry Hurtado. He died of leukemia. We've lost some major stars recently in the last 5 years, but Larry Hurtado said the earliest Christology coming out of the gate, the reason we knew the earliest Christology was the highest Christology is because of worship. Hurtado has produced a bunch of examples in and out of the New Testament where, like graffiti that you find in graveyards and texts in the New Testament, where they were worshiping Jesus from the beginning. Now, if you said, you keep saying this earliest Christology, highest Christology, what would the highest Christology look like? I would say it would be these kind of things. In Mark chapter 2, you'll see me use this. In Mark chapter 2, the man comes through the roof, right? And he says, son, your sins are forgiven. And the Jewish leaders say, you can't do that. Only God can forgive sin. And Jesus says, he responds with an apologetic lesson. Well, so you know that the Son of Man has power on earth to forgive sin. I'll say to you, son, take up your bed and walk. The miracle, apologetics, the miracle shows that he can forgive sin. But the forgiving sin is a mark of high Christology. Men, women, whatever, don't forgive sin of somebody else's or your own. We don't forgive our own sin. Forgiving sin is high Christology. Here's another one. We talked about Philippians 2. High Christology is being born before you were in the manger. High Christology is pre-existence. Because if you truly the nature of God, you didn't just wake up one morning in a crib, outdoors, and that's the beginning of your life. You were walking with Abraham back when you were talking about how many righteous are in Sodom and Gomorrah. Because that person in Genesis 18 is called Lord. In caps. but nobody's seen God the Father. So what's going on here? Bingo. So he forgives sin. He's pre-existent. He's worshiped. And we haven't done this one yet, but watch for it when it comes. He's seated on the right hand of God. Many people think that's the most blasphemous one. If you're some plain old person, you do not claim to share God's throne. Dude, you deserve to be burned at the stake. I mean, that's a real bad one. But those are four. You can forgive sin. Eternity past, you're alive. You're worshiped. These are all big sins, right? Blasphemy. Book of Isaiah. I will not share my glory with another. What is the creed doing in Philippians 2? It's taken that every knee will bow, every tongue will confess. It's from Isaiah. He'll not share his glory with another, but he shares it with Christ. Worship is huge. And the last one is Jesus claims he will sit on the throne with God. These are big. And so in Romans 10:9, Jesus is called Lord in the creed, and Paul makes the application. This is what Joel was talking about. Whoever calls the name of the Lord will be saved. And 1 Corinthians 8:6, has Jesus been moved into the Shema? Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. Because remember in the Shema, hear, O Israel, the Lord your God. And Christians unpacked that and said, Lord is the Son and God is the Father. Now, that's not a Deuteronomy, but Deuteronomy uses both Lord and God. And it looks like they moved Jesus into the Shema. Now, these two guys, I had lunch with, Dunn and Bauckham had a little debate. And they're raising the question, did they move Jesus into the Shema? And Dunn's response was, no, not really. They snugged him right up against it. But he's there. But they snugged him right up against it. Bauckham said, no. They moved him into the Shema. Now, these guys are like Oxford, Cambridge level guys arguing. And Dunn says, that's pretty high. They probably just snugged him up to it. And Bauckham answered, dude, if you think they just snugged him up to the Shema, you got a real problem because you got two gods now. That was an awesome response. You better get him in there with it and explain how the Godhead works rather than have him say outside and there's two gods. So I think Bauckham's right. It most likely was in the Shema, but I mean, that's high Christology. So this one just starts our talk that Jesus is spoken of as deity. Here's some more. And we've talked about these. You'll be able to fill a lot of these in. Philippians 2:6, morphe, which is, remember, morphe is form, but in Greek, form means, the primary meaning, form is nature of, essence. And then the end of Philippians 2:6, see the verses there in Isaiah? They worshiped him. So, he's of the nature of God, he's worshiped, and don't forget Philippians 2 ends with calling him Lord. I mean, this thing, Philippians 2 is heavy Christology. And it's there in the 30s. 1 Corinthians 12:3, Jesus is Lord. Some people say this is the earliest creed of all. Usually they say that's 1 Corinthians 15:3 and following, but it may be 1 Corinthians 12:3. It's so simple to memorize. Jesus is Lord. And that's the communion passage there in 1 Corinthians 11. And we know, I'm not going to keep repeating about Lord. Acts sermon summaries. Here's one. Acts 2:36. He is both Lord and Christ. Here's Acts 5:31. Exalted to the right hand of God. We haven't seen that one yet, but we'll see an example where Jesus claims this himself. He was exalted to the right hand of God. These are creeds and traditions on deity. Okay? Early epistles taught that Jesus was deity. This isn't the creeds. These are some of the earliest epistles. Paul's epistles date from the 50s. And here's a few. Romans 10, this is Paul's comment. Notice this after the creed, 10:9. 12 and 13, Jesus is Lord. Romans 9:5. Remember I told you about this one today? It's hard to tell whether this is God the Father or Jesus the Son, but he's called, the Father is called this otherwise in Romans, but it seems like Jesus is being called true God here. Other texts, we talked about Colossians 2:9. In him dwells the fullness of the Godhead bodily. Titus 2:13 calls Jesus God. Hebrews 1:3, we already mentioned that one. He's the exact representation of his nature. 1:8, if you've never seen this, the writer of Hebrews uses the book of Psalms, and in that text says, to whom did the Lord ever say, thy throne, O God, is forever? But he's talking about Jesus. Thy throne, O God, is forever. So he's saying that God of Psalms there is Jesus. Whatever you think the psalm means, the book of Hebrews is calling Jesus God in 1:8. All right, the Synoptic Gospels. Where do we get this in Matthew, Mark, and Luke? Let's see where he's called the Son of God. Matthew 11:27, Luke 10:22. Now, here's test time. What is a passage that's in Matthew and Luke, but it's not in Mark? What's that source called? Q. Now, no one's decided whether it's a Q book, forget it. What I call Q are simply the verses that are in Matthew and Luke that are not in Mark. This is a Q passage. Critics think the best synoptic verses, the most authoritative, are the Gospel of Mark, because it's the earliest, and Q. They think these, and that's two heads are better than one. You've got Matthew and Luke quoting a Q verse. And some people say in Matthew 11:27, they call this the Johannine thunderbolt. Here, Matthew talks like John in the high Christology of John. He says, no one knows the Son but the Father, and no one knows the Father but the Son, and those to whom he will reveal him. Jesus claims to be the chief revealer, the chief interpreter of the Father. And it's that I and the Father, that's a Johannine verse, but I and the Father are one. It's that kind of verse. No one knows the Father but the Son, because as he says, I was with him. I was with God, that's pre-existence. And Matthew 11:27 is often thought to be one of the highest Christological verses. He's the unique revealer of the Father. In Mark 12:1-12, there's a parable of the wicked tenants. It's a parable. But remember, he sends the owner sends his beloved son and they kill him. He's called the Son here. He's the son of the tenant owner. He's the Son of God in the parable in Mark 12. In Mark 13:32, this is kind of a weird verse. It's the Olivet Discourse. And Mark is saying, 13:32, that time no one knows. No one knows the time. Not even the Son. He says, no one knows the time of the Son's return, neither the angels nor the Son. What? This is a verse that shows he's calling himself Son. But if you're calling yourself the Son of God, because he's talking about the Father in the context, this is really a Son of the Father verse instead of Son of God. But why would you say, I'm the Son of God and I don't know something, i.e., when I'm returning? You can say all you want, well, God put that in his own power, the Father did. Well, he did, but you're still not answering the question. Why does Jesus, who's the Son of God, not know when he's returning? Well, don't forget, he is obedient to his Father, even though he's full deity. He's obedient to his Father, and his Father's keeping this information to himself. But here's what you get out of the deal. It's one of those, I can do nothing but what I see my Father do. I preach what he tells me. And John, which that's happened, those verses are like a half dozen of them. But what he's saying here, the reason this verse is so cool, well, why would you use a verse that says, I'm the Son of God, I don't know something? This is another rule we used the first lecture on Monday. This is embarrassment. This is embarrassment. Isn't that embarrassing to call yourself the Son of Man, Son of God, and in the same sentence say, I don't know something? I don't know what I'm going to do with you. You know, disciples talk to him like that, right? They're going to take a sword and he says, get thee behind me, Satan. And, they had their little discussions. But he says, what you get out of the deal is he called himself the Son of God. And critics need this kind of stuff because they don't take red letter verses at face value, but this must be kind of cool because as one New Testament scholar says, he says, this is so embarrassing that if they wanted to teach the Son of God, they just should have had Jesus say, and I'm the Son of God, and if you're spiritual, you'll believe me. He doesn't. He says, and by the way, I don't know when I'm coming. Don't do that. I was just getting ready to think of you as the Son of God, and you say you don't know something. Well, that's worked out with not a problem. I had a really good friend at Liberty who said to me, if I could, we probably all have one of these. He said, if I could excise one verse from the New Testament that really bothers me, it's Mark 13:32, because Jesus, I feel funny that he shouldn't have said that he's the Son of God, he doesn't know something. He shouldn't say that. And I said to the guy, 2 reasons why I'm so thankful for this verse. Number one, it's very embarrassing. So that means Jesus said it. And also, when people say Jesus was wrong about the time of his coming, that's another problem. It's a so-called contradiction by critics. He predicted he was coming. How could he predict he was coming? He said very clearly he didn't know when he was coming. So that verse solves 2 pithy problems. He did not know when he was returning, so therefore he did not make a false prophecy. And secondly, he calls himself the Son of God. We get both of them in the same deal, and my friend's going to excise that verse. I said, don't do it. It's one of the best. And he goes, years later, he told me, did I say that to you? Yeah, you did. You said you would cut it out. If you wanted to cut out one verse, you cut that one out. He goes, oh, that's pretty good. It's a good verse. We all have those kind of things. But this one is just really cool. He's not wrong about the time of his coming, and he did call himself the Son of God. Yes?
Could this play into the kenosis passage?
Yeah, we're getting close.
Surrendered certain prerogatives in order to accommodate himself to human personality and human flesh?
Yeah, it's Philippians 2 also. And, so that's why we know Jesus got tired. Jesus had to eat. He got a little bit cross sometimes, rarely, but because that's human stuff. If Jesus didn't get cross, you'd say, wow, you're a little... Get thee behind me, Satan. Whoa. But if he didn't do that kind of stuff, you'd say he's not a full human being. But that's not a sin to say that stuff. It's not a sin. He didn't sin. So, yeah, I think it is part of the incarnation thing.
What about the Galilean wedding? The father only knew when the son was going to pick up his bride. And the son never knew when the wedding was going to be, neither did the bride.
Are you talking about the parable of the virgins? No?
Well, that's part of it, but the Galilean wedding was a special type of wedding.
John 2, the changing the water to wine?
No.
I'm still blowing it.
There's been some research that they've uncovered, like the true meaning of the Galilean wedding, and since the disciples were from Galilee, he talked this way to them where they could understand he was coming back to get his bride. And so in the Galilean wedding, the bride got ready for the wedding. The son built the house on top of the father's house for the bride. And the father was the only one that knew when the wedding was going to take place, and it was a surprise. Like he would say, "Go get your bride."
And you would say that.
That's what he was saying.
You mean it's one more of these verses where, yeah. And there's a lot of these. There's a lot of these where Jesus there's not a lot where he says he doesn't know something, but there are verses where he's a human being. He's truly God and truly man, or we don't have an incarnation. So he's got to be truly human. Thank you. All right, we talked about Abba today, Mark 14:36. All right, that's an Aramaic term, which is a criterion that we just didn't give last night. It's on my list, but I didn't go over it. It's Aramaic, so Jesus really did call God Abba, and that's a very personal term for his father. Abba means he recognizes he's the Son of God. That's pretty cool. All right, now, we haven't talked about this one yet. Some pastors, they shouldn't do it. They should study their theology. But a lot of pastors say this: Son of God is Jesus' divine nature. Son of man is his human nature. To which the answer is, Son of man is as high and lofty a term as name as Son of God. It's just as high. And let's talk about that for a second. Son of man is used different ways in Scripture. In Psalms, Son of man is a man. And he's a son of somebody. He's a man. In Ezekiel, Son of man is a prophet. Ezekiel says almost 100 times, prophesy, O Son of man. Son of man can be a prophet. But in Daniel 7, the Son of man is somebody very special. He's not. You might think he's the Father if the Father was exempted in the same verse. He says, the Ancient of Days will send the Son of Man. Now, when you say, like, who's Lord in Genesis 18? Who's walking with Abraham, right? You got that one. Well, it's a Christophany. It's a pre-incarnation appearance to Christ, which means he was from eternity. Okay, what's going on in Daniel? The Ancient of Days sends the Son of Man to earth to set up his kingdom. Oh, well, that's pretty heavy. And critics, even liberals, will define the Son of Man, according to Daniel 7, as a pre-existent divine figure. The Son of Man in Daniel. All right, so you got Son of Man as a man. Son of Man as a prophet, Ezekiel. Son of Man is the person sent by the Ancient of Days. By the way, when you send, that's position. And many times you use that example of the gospel, the Father sent, which again is that point of position. Never compromise deity, but it's a position of sending. And he sends the Ancient of Days to earth to set up God's kingdom. Which one did Jesus mean by Son of Man? Is it really his humanity? And I said, not true. How do we know? Well, he cites Daniel 7 twice as his definition of Son of Man. He claims to be the one who was sent by the Ancient of Days to come to earth to set up the kingdom. This is heavy, heavy stuff, because the Son of Man in Daniel 7 is pre-existent. He's a divine figure, according to liberals. You can look this stuff up. And Jesus claims to be that Son of Man. Now, you're going to see some uses of it here, and you're going to see it's the heavier one, not the mere man or just a prophet. Here's one of them. Mark 12, we just talked about this today. The man comes to the roof. Jesus said, son, your sins are forgiven. They say, you can't say that. That's blasphemy. And they go, Jesus says, yeah, well, so you know that the Son of Man has power to forgive sins. I can do what you call blasphemy. Son, take up your bed and walk, which is an apologetic reason, a miracle, to show that he had power to forgive sin. You can see the miracle, you can't see the forgiveness of sin. But he said the miracle showed he could forgive sin. That's high Christology. But it's the Son of Man who's forgiving sin, not the Son of God. If this were I'm a mere man book of Psalm, who's the Son of Man that you should remember him, in Psalms, he couldn't forgive sin. So it's got to be the other use of that. This is my, we'll get a few here. I'll show you my favorite text. It's right there at the top, Mark 14, 61 to 64. Now, let's get this phrase. I think Mark 14, 61 to 64 is the best text for the deity of Christ in all four Gospels. When I ask my students, they usually take one of these two in John. What's the highest Christology in the Gospels? They'll either say, before Abraham was, I am, John 8, or I and the Father are one. John 10, they took up stones to kill him because they said he was making himself equal to God. I'm not crazy about John 8 or John 10. I know that he's making lofty claims there, but you can say other things about those passages. I predated Abraham. Okay. You can say other things, and remember what they said? How could you predate Abraham? You're not even 50 years old. Well, you could take him other ways. You could take it in a scholarly way. I've studied Abraham. I feel like I was in his head for these years while I did my doctoral dissertation on Abraham. You know, you can say, I mean, it's a little ambiguous. Before Abraham was I am, they misunderstood him. So you could misunderstand him. I and the Father are one. I think that's pretty good. They tried to kill him, but Jesus said husband and wife are one. So I think there could be stronger verses than those two. Let me tell you here why I think Mark 14 is by far the strongest Christology in the Gospels. If you remember, the people are coming up to Jesus to testify. This is the night trial, which is supposed to be illegal, but they did it, and they took it to the Romans. And this is why the Talmud, remember, we were going to stone him, and he was crucified on Passover Eve, because they went to the Romans, right? So these guys are coming in and they're going, well, he said he would tear down the temple and build it in 3 days. Well, that is a blasphemous thing in the Jewish law. To say you tear down the temple or you're the guy who's in charge of the temple, that was I don't see that as being very high Christology, but they considered it blasphemy. All right, he said he would tear it down and put it back up. And in 3 days. Well, they totally missed the point, right, of what the temple is. Because in John 2 said he spoke of the temple of his body is 3 days. Let me say parenthetically, footnote, very quick. In 3 days, you go, well, that's why I have a problem with putting the crucifixion on Friday. Almost everybody puts crucifixion on Friday. For Jews, any part of the day is a whole day. Friday afternoon, all day Saturday. Once you get past down sundown, it's Sunday. There are 2 verses in the Old Testament, one in Esther, and one, it's in one of the historical books, either 1st, 2nd Samuel or 1st, 2nd Kings. And the other one's in Esther. And in both passages, one says 3 days, and the other one says 3 days and 3 nights. And in both cases, it's the day after tomorrow. So there you have your example. It's not scripture twisting at all to say the crucifixion was on Friday and the resurrection is on Sunday. It wasn't true in Esther, it wasn't true in the historical books, and it's not a contradiction of the Gospels. Okay, so all these guys are coming and they're making things up. Well, I mean, he did say he would tear the temple down, but they're making things up. And I don't think the high priest thought they were making much progress. They wanted to kill this guy, and they were looking for something really big. So I get the feeling at this point when he said, okay, great, you witnesses, just leave. And I think what he did was he decided to debate Jesus. Now, if you're the high priest, all you do is you keep sending your guys out and they keep getting slaughtered by Jesus in debates. I mean, here's one. Give us a sign. Who are you? Well, who's the son of David? Guys, he's the son of David. Really? Well, then how come David called him Lord? Jesus walks away from him, left him holding the bag. So he's blowing him away with his logic, and I think the high priest goes, dude, mano a mano, you and me. These guys aren't so good, but you're talking about to the big man here. I've been sending my people out here for a long time. Right here, talk to me. Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One? Now notice the Jewish thing. He didn't say, are you the Christ, the Son of God? Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One? Notice he tries to avoid God's name. Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One? And Jesus says, ego eimi. In Greek, I am. Now Jesus didn't say that in Greek, he said it in Aramaic. But the Gospels are in, like Abba, in the Gospels say it in Greek. Some people think that's the I am of Exodus 3, the bush, the burning bush. Most scholars think, no, he's just saying, yep. Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One? Mistake number 1, if you're the high priest, you think you got him on the first one. He's saying to himself, I got him to say he's the Son of God. And then Jesus goes on. And henceforth you'll see the Son of Man. And I think if it's this mano debate thing, the high priest is going to go, oh, baloney. You're the Son of Man. I'm the Son of Man. The Son of Man is a human being. Stay on Son of God. When Jesus said he's the Son of Man, he got really ticked. At Daniel 7. And Jesus goes, are you the Son of God? Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One? Ego eimi. And henceforth you'll see the Son of Man, and the high priest is getting bothered. What's he going to say next? Jesus said, the Son of Man is going to be coming on the clouds. Now, if you ever studied this, it's a very innocuous phrase. I mean, what is he, an airplane? Coming on the clouds. In the Old Testament, only God is a cloud rider. God rides the clouds. It says he'll take up there's a bunch of verses. He mounts the back of a cherubim, often thought to be some kind of angel. Anyway, in metaphorical language, he's riding an angel through, this is God in Psalms, through the heavens. And he shoots his lightning at his enemies. It's really so he says, henceforth you'll see the Son of Man coming on the clouds, strike 2. You said, ego eimi to Son of God. Now you're saying the Son of Man, you're riding on the clouds. And he implies that I'm going to be judging you guys. Oh, that doesn't get him a lot of mileage with the high priest, right? I'm coming on the clouds. And keep looking here. He says, I'll be seated on the right hand of God. That's the bad boy. Saying you're the Son of God, ego eimi, is bad enough. Calling yourself the Son of Man is getting yourself in further trouble. Riding on the clouds just makes things worse. And now you think you're going to be on his throne? Tears his cloth, formal declaration of blasphemy, and the high priest is doing this. I got you. My boys couldn't do it, temple stuff. Go on home, you guys. I nailed you. And he turns to the Sanhedrin, he goes, what's your charge? Is this blasphemy? And they go, blasphemy. He's ready to die. You know who wins? Jesus, because Jesus just claimed an answer to the high priest's question. Jesus made 3 steps of high Christology. Ego eimi, I'm the Son of God. I'm the Son of Man. I'm coming on the clouds, and I will be seated on the right hand of God. Who in the world do you think you are, big boy? That's a high priest. And he's ticked. Get him out of here. We're going to stone him. Jesus wins because he claims to be the Son of God. Now, people heard this, and they said, he's going a little overboard. Now, maybe even the disciples could have thought that. I mean, Peter was going to take the sword and defend him, and maybe they even thought he was going a little too far. And so they're contemplating these things, but things happened too quickly. He was beat up. He was taken out and crucified. You're going to see what beat up is. Lord willing, we see the shroud slides on Friday. It's nasty. Gibson used the shroud to do that whipping scene, which is so hard to watch in The Passion of the Christ. It's unbelievable. And while I was watching it, they're whipping him on the back, but since he used the shroud, the man in the shroud is whipped all over. And I knew he was going to turn over to get his stomach and stuff. And I don't remember, they either kicked him to turn him over or he turned over because he was hurting so much and he wanted to preserve his back. I don't know. And they start beating his stomach. So it's a nasty beating. And a lot of people died from the bleeding. I know this is gross if you put up with it for a second. But one ancient source says when they beat men, they beat them so thoroughly that their entrails fell out. People died from the beating. And they didn't stone them, they turned them over to the Romans, and that's what happened. But the cool thing here is a very high Christology. And the disciples are thinking about this. Yeah, we've heard him say he's the Son of God, so ego eimi, we got that. Cloud rider? Haven't heard that one before. Son of Man? We've heard that one. Seated on the right hand of God? What are we going to do with all this? And then he dies. Was he a false prophet? Now you got Deuteronomy 13, Deuteronomy 18. Was he a false prophet? And Sunday morning, God raises him. What's true? Son of God, Son of Man, cloud rider, seated on the right hand of God. And they came out like a cannon after the ascension. And they're going, You guys got to know about this guy. He's it. He's the big one. He was raised from the dead. And that's Acts 2, 22 to 24. So you got it all here. I think Mark 14 is the highest Christology. And of course, you got more than one thing. Son of God, Son of Man, cloud rider, sitting on God's right hand. Yes?
Do you think, and this is kind of a fundamental question, but it means a lot to me, but do you believe that the only way we as humans could understand God is to only see him in the flesh as through Jesus and all these names? Like, because God is spirit, and to really understand him fully, we have to see him through his Son. And
That's correct.
That's the only way we could
And God's a spirit and the Holy Spirit's a spirit. So if the example of resurrection of the dead is bodily, Jesus, that's why the New Testament says almost 20 times, he's our guide for resurrection of the body.
Right. So this is the only way to really explain who God is.
That's correct. That's why Jesus said, he that's seen me has seen the Father. There you go. So, okay, we're about done here. Here's some other things, just to tie it all together. The baptismal scene. These are some other hints of high Christology. The baptismal scene, the dove, and so on. Exorcisms and other miracles. Who does exorcisms and miracles? Jesus is the agent of salvation. Jesus is the door to the kingdom. There's another big one. The inscription on the cross. A lot of critics do this inscription on the cross as a big deal. And they said, oh, don't say he's the king of the Jews. Say he called himself the king of the Jews. And Pilate said, I've written what I've written. So, here's from the Gospel of John.
Can you go back to the previous slide just real quick?
Sorry, who's talking?
Here, can you go back to the previous slide for like 3 seconds?
You not take your picture?
I did not.
Okay, got it?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Here's John's high Christology. They used to say this is the highest. Prologue, John 1:1 and John 1:18, both called Jesus God. I and the Father are one, that's 10:30, 8:58, before Abraham was, I am. Thomas, when he sees Jesus, how does he respond? My Lord and my God. In the Greek, Thomas's response is the clearest time Jesus is called God in the New Testament. Jewish response, both those times, when he claims he's the Son in 5, and when he claims I and the Father are one, they take up stones to kill him. They knew what he was saying. So, this is where we end. We can move from these implicit, critically, we can move from the comments that the critics allow in the earliest sources, an implicit Christology, he seems to be implying he's somebody different, special, to an explicit Christology, like this. It's the last slide. In the early text, Jesus' person and teachings are confirmed by his resurrection. This isn't Habermas's Apologetic. It is, but I got it from Acts 2, 22 to 24. Paul tells at Areopagus, he says he's proven all these things by raising him from the dead. Romans 1, 3, and 4, the creed, showing himself to be the Messiah, Son of God, and Lord by virtue of his resurrection. So, highest Christology, based on two things, the teachings of Jesus and the early creeds. And this is how high Christology blows out of the gates in 30-ish, or, soon after. And, well, even Pentecost sermon by Peter is almost 2 months later. But it comes right on the heels of the death. And it's the resurrection that showed them that he was who he claimed to be. And so we'll go forth from here, because today I said deity, death, resurrection, we've got to work on the history and the other two. But I figured if we get this, go all the way through this course,